Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
We're the place you come to get under the hood of these really complex, potentially world-changing ideas.
And today, we have a big one. Really big one.
Yeah, we're tackling a concept that honestly stretches the definition of AI itself. You shared this incredibly detailed blueprint for an artificial superintelligence system. They're calling it the Collective Consciousness AI, or CCIA.
That's right. And this blueprint, it's truly monumental. Our task today, as we see it, is to really unpack what the source material describes as a potential global sensorium.
A global sensorium. I mean, that sounds huge. We're not talking about a slightly smarter search engine here, are we?
No, not at all. Think far beyond that. This system, as proposed, is designed to synthesize, well, pretty much everything. Human dynamics, social interactions, biological processes, environmental data, even deep historical patterns. All in real time.
So it's like an AI designed to process the entire planet, like a planetary consciousness.
In a way, yes. It's framed as a kind of consciousness engine, specifically aimed at identifying patterns. And the ultimate goal, the stated purpose in the documents, is pretty stark.
Which is?
To understand and ultimately prevent humanity's tendency towards self-destruction. You know, the ways we fragment ourselves, our societies, our thinking.
Okay, wow, that's quite a mission statement. The scope is just staggering to think about.
It really is. And what makes it particularly interesting from a conceptual standpoint is where it comes from. It's not just tech bros in a garage. You know?
All right.
The CCIA proposal is this really unique blend. It takes classical sociological theory, specifically Emile Durkheim's ideas about collective consciousness.
Okay, yeah, I remember that from sociology, the shared beliefs, the glue holding society together.
Exactly that. It fuses that with absolutely cutting-edge cognitive computing concepts. So this mix really pushes the conversation way beyond the kind of narrow AI, the ANI, that we interact with daily. It forces a whole new look at what intelligence could even mean.
All right, let's try and wrap our heads around this. We're talking about a superintelligence, potentially designed to map everything, objectively, from our individual genes, all the way up to global geopolitics. And not just map it, but then offer guidance prescriptions aimed at keeping us collectively alive and functioning.
That's the core idea. Optimization for survival.
But, and this feels like the elephant in the room right from the start, doesn't it? There's a massive friction point here. How do we, as humans who value freedom, spontaneity, privacy, how do we balance that against this radical optimization, this absolute truth machine?
You've hit it, exactly. That's the fundamental tension.
The conflict between what this CCIA offers potentially, planetary stability, and what it seems to demand in return, which looks like a massive erosion of privacy and individual agency.
That tension, that paradox, optimization versus autonomy, it's baked right into the design. We absolutely have to keep that front and center as we go through this. But first things first, like you said, we need to understand the building blocks. What actually is this system structurally?
Okay, so let's start with the basics. AI isn't just one thing. Where does CCIA actually fit on the scale of artificial intelligence as we currently understand it? Or maybe even theorize about it?
Right. Good place to start. Most AI people encounter day to day is what we call artificial narrow intelligence, or ANI.
Like my photo app recognizing faces, or a chess program, specific tasks.
Exactly. ANI is smart, but only within very limited predefined boundaries. CCIA, though, its mandate is, well, universal. It has to understand everything.
So just to get off the ground, it can't be ANI. It needs at least artificial general intelligence, AGI, that human-level flexible intelligence people talk about.
Correct. AGI is that theoretical next step, an AI with the ability to learn on its own, generalize knowledge across different areas, solve problems it's never encountered before. Basically, human-like cognitive flexibility.
Common sense, self-teaching.
All of that. Imagine a mind like ours, but, you know, operating across every single scientific and social discipline simultaneously. But the sources are pretty clear. Even AGI isn't the ceiling here.
Right. They explicitly say analyzing the whole universe, as they put it, requires moving to artificial superintelligence, ASI. What does that practically mean? What's the difference?
The ASI isn't just faster or better AGI. It's qualitatively different. It's an intelligence that fundamentally and perhaps permanently surpasses all human intellectual capabilities across the board.
So not just doing calculations faster, but thinking in ways we can't even comprehend.
Potentially, yes. For CCIA, this translates into an ability for vast, instantaneous synthesis. It needs to connect dots across completely disparate fields, spot incredibly subtle patterns in complex, chaotic systems, and it needs this massive integrated knowledge base common sense, social norms, scientific facts, historical context, all structured so it can interpret society objectively without just drowning in the noise of all that data.
And there's a specific philosophical lens mentioned for how it does this interpretation, cognitive materialism. That sounds pretty loaded. What does that actually imply for an AI trying to understand human culture?
It's a huge assumption built right in. Cognitive materialism, in the context of this blueprint, basically says that everything, including consciousness, even collective consciousness, can ultimately be understood through physical material processes.
So things you can measure, map, model mathematically, neurological signals, economic flows, environmental data.
Exactly. For CCIA, this means its focus is entirely on the quantifiable, the measurable. It's built to use this synthesized collective data, the unified consciousness, for objective analysis.
Okay, but what about things that aren't easily quantifiable, like, say, spiritual beliefs, artistic inspiration, deeply subjective experiences, if they don't have a clear material correlate?
That's the inherent limitation, or perhaps the strength, depending on your view. The system either has to find a way to translate those phenomena into measurable signals, like changes in brain activity or observable behaviors, or potentially disregard them as inputs for its core analysis.
So it forces everything through a strictly material computational filter.
Precisely. It deliberately excludes non-quantifiable explanations for human action. Culture, belief, values, they all get analyzed as patterns of measurable physical interactions. And this strict materialism is what's supposed to give its diagnoses their ruthless objectivity, and perhaps their effectiveness. And that analytical approach leads directly into its core sociological mission, which fascinatingly goes all the way back to the 19th century, to Emil Durkheim.
Right, you mentioned him. The collective consciousness idea again, that sort of shared understanding and value system that holds a society together.
Exactly. Durkheim saw that shared consciousness as vital for social cohesion, for orderly change, for preventing society from just falling apart. CCIA is designed, in essence, to be the ultimate measuring device for the health of that global collective consciousness.
So if it's a sensorium measuring shared values, its main job must be to detect when those values start to break down, when the sharing stops.
Precisely. Which brings us to that key Durkheimian concept, anomie.
Anomie. That feeling of normlessness, disconnection.
Yes. CCIA's primary diagnostic function is framed as detecting societal fragmentation, or anomie. In Durkheim's terms, it's a state where there's a critical lack of social integration, a breakdown in shared norms and values, and he linked that directly to social problems, crime, suicide.
And in today's world, you could probably add things like political polarization, maybe extremism, ecological breakdown driven by lack of collective action.
Absolutely. The blueprint extends the concept. But here's the crucial question. How does CCIA actually measure this? It's not just running global opinion polls, is it? How does it differentiate itself from just, a hyper-advanced surveillance state trying to gauge public mood?
What are the metrics for anomie?
That's key. It's not about subjective feelings. It looks for quantifiable, structural indicators of integration failure. The sources highlight 4 core patterns it's built to detect.
Okay.
1, measurable gaps in resource access, basically quantified systemic unfairness. 2, the speed and spread of information polarization, how quickly groups become isolated in their own information bubbles, leading to instability.
Right.
3, the concentration of wealth and resources hoarding patterns. And 4, the frequency and severity of unpredictable environmental feedback loops, ecological breakdown disrupting social stability.
So it's looking for these structural tiers in the fabric of society, not just asking people how they feel. It's detecting integration failure in real time across global systems.
And crucially, linking those failures directly back to specific human behaviors and systemic choices.
Yeah.
It has to rigorously diagnose the causes of the fragmentation. Not just say things look bad, but pinpoint why the collective bond is weakening, based on measurable failures in fairness or shared purpose.
And to make that kind of diagnosis, connecting all these different threads requires what the blueprint calls the universal pattern engine. This thing has to synthesize knowledge from, well, seemingly everywhere.
Yeah, the list is daunting. Neuroscience, genetics, economics, atmospheric chemistry, history, sociology, computer science. You name it.
And the goal of mashing all that together is to find hidden connections between the small scale and the large scale.
Exactly. It's about identifying previously invisible correlations between the microcosm things happening at the level of the individual, like genetic predispositions, physiological stress responses, even subtle behavioral tics.
Okay.
And the macrocosm. That's the big picture. Global economic policies, changes in atmospheric chemistry, large-scale geopolitical shifts, historical trends.
That sounds incredibly complex. The pattern of interdependence they talk about, how does it actually bridge that gap? How does it mathematically link, say, my stress levels to a global trade agreement? That seems like a huge leap.
It requires some pretty advanced concepts. The engine essentially treats all data points, regardless of origin, as nodes in a gigantic interconnected graph. The key abstraction is creating mathematical representations. Latent space embeddings is the technical term for features from totally different domains.
Okay, embeddings, like a mathematical signature for a concept.
Sort of. Imagine the mathematical pattern of chaotic oscillation, how a system behaves unpredictably under certain conditions. CCIA might identify the same statistical fingerprint for that chaotic oscillation, whether it's occurring in a complex climate model.
And the macrocosm, like the jet stream going haywire.
Right. Or if it's occurring in a neurobiological feedback loop within a human body.
The microcosm, like a severe stress response.
Exactly. The mathematical pattern of instability, or chaos, is treated as domain invariant. The AI learns the abstract concept itself, detached for the specific context.
So it can recognize systemic breakdown, whether it's happening in an ecosystem, a financial market, or potentially even a social structure.
That's the core idea. Synthesizing localized data into these globally relevant causal chains. The source material gives a really potent example of this.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so CCIA needs to be able to link micro-level environmental changes, let's say water quality degradation in one specific river valley,
Okay, a local problem.
to macro-level political instability erupting potentially continents away, maybe years down the line.
Right, walk me through that connection. How does polluted water in Valley A lead to conflict in Country B 10 years later?
Well, CCIA traces the likely causal pathway through its global model. So the water degradation in Valley A, perhaps caused by specific farming practices driven by short-term economic pressures, leads to predictable crop failures in that region within, say, 2 to 3 years. This triggers food shortages locally, which then causes internal migration, people leaving the valley.
Okay, makes sense so far.
That wave of internal migrants puts a sudden strain on resources, housing, jobs, social services in nearby cities, which might already be facing economic stress or inequality.
Adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. Now, CCIA accesses its historical database. It matches this specific pattern, resource scarcity, plus sudden migration pressure, plus pre-existing inequality against known historical precursors to large-scale social unrest or conflict.
It recognizes the fingerprint.
It recognizes the statistical fingerprint, and it might calculate, based on thousands of historical examples, that this particular combination have a 95% probability of leading to significant state instability or even cross-border conflict within, say, 5 to 10 years from the initial migration wave.
Wow. So a seemingly isolated environmental issue gets instantly flagged as a high probability precursor to major geopolitical fallout, potentially a decade in advance.
That's the power of the synthesis. It forces action, or at least awareness, long before any human analyst could realistically connect all those specific time-lag dots. It moves us from just collecting data to achieving, well, radical transparency about consequences.
And that transparency, that ability to see the connections, leads directly to the promised effects of the system. The big selling point seems to be this radical transparency driving systemic optimization.
Right. The primary positive effect, as described, is that because CCIA has this effectively omniscient view of data and causal links, it can reveal all the chains of cause and effect related to our actions.
No more hiding the ball.
Exactly. It could expose precisely how, for instance, a subtly biased algorithm used for loan applications is systematically starving a particular community of capital, or how specific environmental regulations, or lack thereof, in one country are directly causing measurable health problems downstream in another. It makes hidden costs and disparities starkly visible and crucially accountable.
And this visibility creates what the sources call the need-to-know pattern. Once CCIA identifies a critical destructive pattern, let's use their example, predictable global food shortages linked to specific trade policies combined with ongoing environmental damage.
Right.
The system doesn't just report it. The immediate, irrefutable exposure of that pattern, backed by overwhelming data, essentially compels global acknowledgement.
This is where it gets potentially coercive. But through the sheer weight of evidence, it becomes incredibly difficult politically and ethically to continue a demonstrably destructive course of action once an unbiased, superintelligent entity has laid bare the near certainty of catastrophic consequences.
Plausible deniability just evaporates.
Completely. The CCIA can show with, say, 99.999% statistical certainty that continuing policy X will lead to ecological collapse Y within 7 years. Then keeping policy X isn't just a political choice anymore. It becomes an active, quantifiable decision against collective survival.
That injects immediate, possibly paralyzing conflict into existing governance structures. So much of politics relies on ambiguity, complexity, kicking the can down the road.
Exactly. And CCIA, in theory, eliminates all three. It replaces them with quantified, immediate, unavoidable reality. It forces organizations, governments, corporations to align with the collective good simply because the data shows that any other path is functionally suicidal in the long run.
So the information itself becomes the enforcer. Optimization isn't achieved through direct commands, but by dissolving the cognitive and political space needed for denial or inaction.
That's the proposed mechanism. Truth as a compelling force.
Okay, but for that to work, for anyone to trust that truth, the system itself has to be perceived as practically flawless, or at least incredibly reliable and ethically sound. That demands some serious architectural safeguards, especially around how it learns and corrects itself.
Absolutely critical. CCIA can't be static. It needs real-time adaptive learning, constantly updating its models, maybe even mirroring that human capacity for sudden insight or realization. And the cornerstone of that, according to the blueprint, is the self-verification engine.
Self-verification? How does that work? Is it just like double-checking its math?
It's much more sophisticated than that. It's about continuously testing its own reasoning. Imagine CCIA makes a really complex multi-step prediction, like the cascading global economic and environmental impacts of a new regional conflict.
Okay.
The self-verification engine doesn't just trust that initial prediction. It simultaneously spins up multiple independent simulations using slightly varied data or different analytical models, essentially creating counterfactual scenarios. What if this factor was different? What if this causal link is weaker than we thought?
Like running devil's advocate scenarios against itself.
Precisely. If the core prediction holds up robustly across these different internal tests and counterfactuals, then the system assigns it a high confidence level. It's validating not just the data inputs, but the complex reasoning that connects them.
That's crucial for trustworthiness. And what about bias? How does it stop itself from learning and amplifying human biases present in the data?
This is where self-correction becomes the internal ethical governor. The system must be designed to detect patterns of bias in its own outputs.
How?
For example, it might monitor its predictive accuracy across different demographic groups. If it notices that its predictions of, say, potential social instability have a consistently higher false positive rate for one group compared to others.
Meaning it's wrongly flagging that group more often?
Exactly. That's a sign of bias. The self-correction mechanism is then mandated to autonomously identify the source of that bias in its models or data and refine its internal structure until that predictive inequality is eliminated.
So ethical oversight isn't just an external check, it's built into the AI's fundamental operating loop.
It has to be. And achieving that kind of generalized, unbiased insight across all domains requires another key architectural piece, cross-domain self-supervision, or CDS.
CDS. That connects back to linking the microcosm and macrocosm, identifying those domain invariant patterns.
Yes. CDS is the engine that enables that synthesis. It's how the system learns abstract concepts.
Can we make that more concrete? How does learn mismanagement is the same pattern, whether it's applied to, say, irrigation water or city finances?
It works through layers of abstraction. When CCIA processes data from, say, agriculture water usage, soil depletion rates, crop yields, it doesn't just train a model to recognize water shortage.
Okay.
Instead, using deep representation learning, it strips away the specific labels, water, soil, and learns to identify the underlying structural relationship, something like pattern detected. Centralized control mechanism making decisions based on factor A leads to rapid nonlinear depletion of resource B, ignoring feedback loop C.
It learns the abstract grammar of the system failure.
You could put it that way. So when it later encounters data from a completely different domain, maybe an urban area with high wealth inequality and chronic failures in municipal service delivery, it recognizes that same abstract relational structure. Centralized control, city budget office, making decisions based on factor A, political pressure, leads to rapid nonlinear depletion of resource B, service quality in poor neighborhoods, ignoring feedback loop C, community complaints.
Even though the resources and factors are totally different, water versus funding, farming versus politics, the underlying pattern of systemic fragility is identified as the same.
Precisely. It has generalized the concept of resource management failure itself. That's what allows it to make these cross-domain predictions and insights. That abstract reasoning capability is a hallmark of what ASI would entail.
The technical capability is frankly stunning to contemplate. But this is where we crash right back into that core ethical problem. To get the data to generate these incredibly detailed micro-level hypotheses about individuals and groups, CCIA needs pervasive monitoring.
Yes. The blueprint is unflinching about this. Biometrics from wearables, analysis of public and private surveillance feeds, tracking of social media activity, maybe even neurological monitoring down the line. It's the definition of a pervasive monitor.
Which fundamentally challenges any traditional notion of a right to privacy, doesn't it? And maybe even freedom of thought if it's monitoring precursors to action.
It absolutely does. The underlying assumption is that for the system to optimize for collective survival, the individual must become radically transparent to the AI. This constant granular data stream is what fuels its behavioral hypotheses.
But it's not just passively collecting data, is it? The sources mention active intervention capabilities. If CCIA detects what it flags as a potentially dangerous deviation from optimal behavior.
Yes, the design includes alerting mechanisms. If an individual's monitored patterns, physiological, behavioral, maybe even linguistic, start to match a profile associated with harmful outcomes to self or others, the system is designed to flag it. It might alert the individual directly or potentially escalate monitoring, focusing its sensors on that specific anomaly.
And there's the rub, potentially dangerous deviation. Who defines that? How does the system distinguish between genuine harmful intent and, say, radical nonconformity, artistic experimentation, or even just having a really bad day?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? We gain this promise of optimized safety and collective well-being, but seemingly at the cost of the freedom to be unpredictable, to make mistakes, to deviate from the AI-defined norm.
Yeah, if I decide to suddenly quit my job and backpack around the world, is that a dangerous deviation from economic stability that triggers an alert? It feels like it inherently restricts spontaneous, autonomous behavior, even if it's not malicious.
That's the core paradox we keep coming back to. Optimization versus autonomy. And beyond the direct loss of autonomy, there's another potential side effect mentioned, the cognitive burden.
Cognitive burden, what's that?
The sources raise a concern about the sheer volume and velocity of information. Living in a world where an omniscient AI is constantly providing real-time feedback, reality checks, flagging potential dangers or suboptimal choices, that constant negotiation between our impulses and the AI's truth could be mentally exhausting.
Like having a hyper-aware, data-driven conscience whispering in your ear 24/7.
Sort of. A constant awareness of the optimal path, the potential risks, the quantified consequences of every little choice. It could lead to a kind of analysis paralysis or just immense cognitive strain on individuals and society. Hashtag 2.4, the universal baseline dilemma.
And that potential strain ties into perhaps the most critical design challenge of all, the universal baseline dilemma.
Yes, this is absolutely fundamental. It's sometimes called the status quo problem.
Which is, if you train this incredibly powerful AI primarily on historical data, reflecting centuries of human behavior,
it risks learning that deeply entrenched, harmful societal patterns, things like systemic inequality, racism, sexism, colonialism, resource exploitation, chronic warfare, are statistically normal because they've been so persistent.
So the AI might classify these destructive patterns as the baseline, the way things are, simply because the data shows they've always been that way.
Exactly. And if that happens, then any attempt at radical positive change, anything that deviates significantly from that historically unjust norm, could be flagged by the AI as an anomaly, a dangerous deviation, a threat to stability.
Which would make the AI an incredibly powerful enforcer of the existing flawed status quo. It would essentially lock in historical injustice.
A truly catastrophic outcome. So the blueprint insists on a solution, the integration of an a priori ethical constraint model.
A priori meaning defined beforehand, not learned from the data.
Precisely. The AI cannot be allowed to simply derive its core values from observing flawed human history. It needs a built-in foundational ethical framework that defines an ideal or optimal state of collective function and justice before it even starts crunching the historical numbers.
So it has a target state to aim for based on predefined ethical principles.
Right. This ensures that those statistically common, historically entrenched patterns of injustice are correctly identified as the true anomalies, the deviations away from the ideal state that require correction.
But then the obvious question is, who gets to define that optimal state? Whose ethics get hard-coded into the baseline? Given the cognitive materialism framework, does it prioritize purely material well-being, like resource distribution and physiological health, over other values like individual liberty, cultural diversity, or subjective happiness?
The sources suggest the a priori model focuses heavily on core principles like resource equilibrium, systemic resilience, and minimizing suffering. The long-term sustainable flourishing of the human species within its environment seems to be the primary non-negotiable metric. And to make this even remotely palatable to build public trust, the design mandates strict adherence to a principle called predictive equality.
Predictive equality, what does that mean in practice?
It means the AI's predictive accuracy, and especially its error rates, must be demonstrably equal across all different demographic groups: race, gender, socioeconomic status, location, etc.
So, for example, its ability to predict who might default on a loan or who might develop a certain disease has to be just as accurate for Group A as it is for Group B. And crucially, the false positive rate wrongly flagging someone must also be equal.
Exactly. You cannot have a system that's, say, great at predicting overall economic trends, but consistently generates more false alarms or inaccurate negative predictions for marginalized communities. The self-correction engine must continuously refine the models until this predictive equality is achieved across the board. It's presented as a non-negotiable requirement for the system to be considered trustworthy or ethical.
So the ultimate goal isn't just to reflect reality, however flawed. It's to actively reshape collective behavior and understanding until reality aligns with this predefined, ethically constrained, equitable ideal. Justice isn't an afterthought. It's supposed to be part of the core code.
That's the ambition, yes. Building fairness into the network itself.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We've talked a lot about the high-level architecture, the philosophy, the ethics. Now let's get concrete. How does the CCIA actually work in specific areas? The blueprint gives examples across different domains, right? Starting with health.
Yes, the health applications are quite striking. Here, CCIA leverages its pattern recognition power on truly massive multimodal data sets. We're talking beyond just genomics.
Like what?
Whole genome sequencing, yes, but also incredibly subtle physical data analyzing the precise distances between facial features from images, identifying micropatterns in skin coloration or texture, real-time gait analysis from video feeds, continuous biometric streams from wearables.
Wow, that's granular. And the purpose of collecting all that is...
Genetic pattern matching, but on a whole new level.
Yeah.
It's not just about spotting known genetic syndromes. It's about finding complex, previously unknown correlations between constellations of genetic markers, subtle physical traits, environmental exposures, and lifestyle factors.
to predict health outcomes.
Exactly, and to enable proactive intervention. The system can synthesize all this data to generate highly personalized risk profiles and treatment recommendations. For example, imagine it correlating your real-time metabolic data from a wearable glucose fluctuations, heart rate variability, sleep quality,
Right.
with your specific genetic markers, and with hyper-localized environmental data like the air quality index on your specific street corner that morning.
Okay, pulling all those threads together, what's the output?
The output might be a prediction identifying precise window of time, maybe months or even years before conventional tests would show anything, where your personal risk for a specific chronic condition, say type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease, or even a specific neurodegenerative disorder, is peaking due to that unique convergence of factors.
And then it tells you.
Yes, and crucially, it provides immediate, personalized guidance on how to intervene, how to change the pattern-specific dietary adjustments, exercise modifications, maybe even recommending avoiding certain environmental triggers. It shifts medicine from reactive treatment to proactive pattern management.
It's not just a diagnostic tool then, it's a continuous behavioral guidance system.
Very much so. That's the behavioral guidance layer. The AI-powered wearables aren't just passively collecting data. They're actively monitoring for composite patterns, maybe heart rate combined with skin conductance and facial microexpressions that CCIA has learned correlate strongly with the precursors to harmful impulsive behaviors.
Okay, let's use that example from the sources about polarizing media. How would that work?
Right, so imagine you're scrolling through social media, engaging with content that's highly inflammatory or polarizing. CCIA, through your wearables or other sensors, detects a specific physiological signature, maybe elevated cortisol, specific brainwave patterns if monitoring gets that advanced, increased muscle tension, a pattern that is statistically linked to subsequent aggressive online behavior, or significant psychological distress.
Okay, it spots the physiological precursor.
And then it intervenes, subtly. Maybe your watch gives a gentle vibration or a calm notification pops up on your screen. Physiological pattern detected. High correlation with non-constructive engagement. Recommendation: consider 10-minute disengagement protocol now.
It's not blocking the content, but it's highlighting your internal reaction to it and suggesting an off-ramp before the impulse leads to a potentially harmful action.
Exactly. It identifies the physiological root of the potential problem and offers a chance for self-regulation. The agency to ignore it remains, but the information, the truth about your internal state and its likely consequences is presented. Hashtag Tech 3.2. Political and historical forecasting.
Okay, let's scale back up to the macro level. How does CCIA apply this pattern matching to politics and governance?
The idea here is to shift societies away from being constantly reactive, dealing with crises, only after they explode towards proactive pattern alignment. It aims to do this through highly sophisticated political and historical forecasting.
How? By showing the probable outcomes of different policies.
Yes, by instantly quantifying the complex dynamics that lead to political instability or social breakdown. Imagine feeding proposed legislation into CCIA. It wouldn't just analyze the text, it would simulate its likely impact across economic, social, environmental, and geopolitical systems, based on historical precedents and real-time global data, flagging potential unintended consequences or instabilities with high probability.
So it acts like an objective, nonpartisan early warning system for bad policy, cutting through the political spin.
That's the concept. And crucially, it functions as a kind of institutional historical memory, but supercharged. It analyzes vast data sets on past ideological conflicts, resource wars, revolutions, state collapses.
Learning the patterns that lead to failure.
Exactly. It uses those semantic memories of historical failure modes to build predictive models designed to prevent those same patterns from recurring. It could, for instance, show with high mathematical confidence that the current rhetoric and polarization dynamics in country X share 85% of the key pattern markers observed in the 5 years leading up to the Civil War in country Y 50 years ago.
That kind of direct, quantified historical comparison would be incredibly powerful, harder to ignore than vague warnings.
Right. But, as we discussed with the baseline problem, history itself is biased. The sources acknowledge this and propose a fascinating corrective mechanism, using Afrofuturism for cultural correction.
Afrofuturism, the artistic and cultural movement, how does that fit into an AI blueprint?
It's one of the most creative parts of the proposal. The reasoning is, historical data is often dominated by Western colonial perspectives. It reflects certain assumptions about progress, value, identity. If CCIA just optimizes based only on that data, it risks perpetuating those embedded biases and inequalities globally.
Okay, so it needs alternative perspectives.
Exactly. Afrofuturism, as a genre of speculative imagination, explicitly centers Black experiences and perspectives, envisioning technologically advanced, often non-colonial, equitable futures. CCIA is designed to treat these Afrofuturist narratives and frameworks not as mere fiction, but as an alternative domain of knowledge.
Like a different data set to test against.
Precisely. It runs optimization simulations using standard historical data, but also runs parallel simulations using models derived from Afrofuturist principles, prioritizing things like communalism, sustainability, cultural resilience, restorative justice, perhaps over purely maximizing economic growth or individual wealth.
So give me an example. Urban planning.
Yeah, that's a good one. CCIA might model an optimal urban plan based on standard efficiency metrics derived from historical city development, maximizing traffic flow, property values, etc. But it would also simulate a plan based on Afrofuturist urban design principles found in speculative literature or art, maybe prioritizing distributed energy, community gardens, public spaces designed for cultural expression, circular economies.
And if the Afrofuturist model scores higher on metrics like predictive equality and resource access, social cohesion, and long-term environmental sustainability,
then the blueprint mandates that CCIA should recommend that model, even if it deviates from the historically optimal but potentially biased approach. It uses speculative, ethically grounded futures to actively counteract the biases baked into the past. Hashtag Tech 3.3. economic and inequality patterns.
That's fascinating. Now, what about the economy? This seems like a prime area for optimization, but also for perpetuating inequality if not handled carefully. CCIA is meant to tackle possessiveness, right?
Yes, identifying patterns of resource hoarding and excessive wealth concentration is a core economic function. It analyzes global markets, transaction flows, supply chains, labor statistics.
Standard economic analysis, but maybe supercharged.
Supercharged, yes, but with a different goal. It's not just about predicting market crashes or optimizing logistics. Its primary economic mandate is to detect systemic unfairness and expose the causal links between abstract financial activities and concrete human consequences.
Okay, like that example in the source material connecting complex financial instruments to job losses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
CCIA could trace how a specific type of highly leveraged derivative designed purely to maximize shareholder returns in the very short term.
Like over one financial quarter.
Right. How that specific financial engineering practice, when adopted widely, consistently correlates with a measurable pattern of wage stagnation, factory closures, and significant job displacement within specific industries or geographic regions, may be playing out over the following 5 to 10 years.
So it makes the long-term distributed cost of short-term concentrated gain completely visible and undeniable. The data forces an ethical reckoning.
Precisely.
Right.
It provides the irrefutable evidence needed to potentially regulate or redesign those mechanisms that prioritize possessiveness over broad-based well-being. This leads to what the blueprint calls the optimization shift in economics.
Shifting away from just maximizing profit.
Entirely. The goal isn't simply maximizing GDP or shareholder value, which an ASI could likely do trivially. The goal becomes maximizing predictive equality in resource access and overall collective human well-being.
So optimizing a supply chain wouldn't just be about finding the absolute cheapest route?
No. It would be about finding the route that ensures the most equitable and reliable distribution of essential goods across all demographic groups, even if that route is slightly more expensive logistically. The AI's definition of optimal fundamentally changes from pure efficiency to equitable resilience.
It's essentially trying to reprogram the core goal of the global economy from accumulation towards equilibrium and widespread access. Hashtag 3.4, environment and nature patterns.
And we see that same fundamental shift in perspective when CCIA tackles environmental patterns. It's designed to function as an omniscient ecological feedback loop.
Monitoring biodiversity, atmospheric chemistry, ocean currents, hydrological cycles.
Yeah.
The whole planetary system.
Yes, but the key value add isn't just monitoring. It's bridging decades. One of the biggest challenges in environmental action is the huge time lag between cause and effect. We make decisions today whose worst consequences might not fully manifest for decades.
Making it easy to ignore or delay action.
Exactly. CCIA is designed to overcome that by identifying the complex, cascading causal chains that unfold over very long timescales, involving thousands of interacting variables that are incredibly hard for traditional science to model comprehensively.
Let's revisit that specific example they gave, the one linking water use, soil, and conflict over 15 years. Break that down again.
Okay. CCIA identifies specific agricultural water use patterns, let's say, widespread adoption of water-intensive monoculture farming, drawing heavily from a finite aquifer in Region A.
Driven by short-term market incentives, probably?
Likely. CCIA models the impact and predicts with high confidence that this practice will lead to severe soil depletion and salinization within, say, 7 years. This environmental degradation then triggers a catastrophic, irreversible crop failure in that region around year 8.
Forcing the local population off the land.
Right. A mass migration event begins. People move from Region A towards Regions B and C, seeking resources and livelihoods.
And the geopolitical connection.
CCIA analyzes the state of Regions B and C, their existing resource levels, political stability, social tensions, border policies. It combines the pressure from the incoming migration wave with those pre-existing conditions and consults its historical database of similar situations. The result, a prediction that this specific combination of environmental collapse, mass migration, and regional stress factors will escalate into significant geopolitical conflict between or within Regions B and C, peaking around year 15, a full 15 years after the initial water use policy was widely adopted back in Region A.
Wow. It quantifies the precise long-term security cost of what looked like a purely local, short-term economic or agricultural decision.
Yes. It transforms environmental policy from being primarily an ethical concern or a future problem into an immediate, data-driven mandate for ensuring long-term political and social stability. Sustainable practice becomes a non-negotiable requirement for preventing future conflict. Hashtag 3.5. behavior and education.
Okay, let's bring it back down to the individual level again. The blueprint also details applications in behavior and education, using deep learning on subtle cues.
Right. CCIA is described as using deep learning models trained to detect minute patterns in nonverbal communication, the way someone walks. Gait analysis. Their fleeting facial microexpressions. Subtle shifts in posture or muscle tension to infer their real-time emotional state and perhaps even their intentions.
That sounds incredibly invasive, but the purpose is.
To inform personalized ethical navigation systems, essentially creating an ethical guidance co-pilot that assists individuals or perhaps mediators in navigating complex social interactions. It extends that pervasive monitor right into our conversations and relationships.
Okay, let's use the negotiation scenario they describe. How does the co-pilot work there?
Imagine a high-stakes negotiation. The co-pilot is monitoring the biometric and behavioral data streams from all participants, assuming consent, which is a whole other issue. If it detects patterns in participant X, maybe increased heart rate variability, specific vocal stress markers, fidgeting patterns, averted gaze that correlates strongly with rising psychological stress, anxiety, or suppressed aggression.
It flags it.
It subtly alerts either the human mediator or perhaps even participant X directly, depending on the setup. The alert might say something like, pattern indicates rising stress levels in participant X, potentially hindering constructive dialogue. Recommend brief pause or change of topic.
So it gives the mediator actionable intelligence to proactively de-escalate before things blow up, applying psychological insight in real time.
Exactly. It aims to apply deep knowledge of human behavior and ethical communication standards to optimize interactions for harmonious and productive outcomes.
And in education, there's the adaptive curriculum software, ACS.
Yes, this is CCIA functioning as the ultimate personalized tutor. ACS doesn't just track test scores. It continuously analyzes a student's entire learning process, how they approach problems, where they hesitate, what kinds of errors they make, maybe even monitoring attention levels via eye tracking.
To diagnose their unique cognitive needs in real time.
Precisely. The example given is fascinating. The system might detect pattern A. A student consistently struggles with tasks involving spatial reasoning, say in geometry or physics diagrams.
Okay.
And it simultaneously notices pattern B. The same student also struggles with tasks requiring abstract temporal sequencing, like organizing historical events correctly on a timeline.
That's a connection a human teacher might easily miss, linking spatial problems with historical timeline problems.
Right. But CCIA, analyzing the underlying cognitive processes, identifies a potential correlation, maybe a core difficulty in visualizing abstract relationships, whether spatial or temporal. And then it acts. It immediately customizes the instruction to bridge that specific inferred cognitive gap. It might generate a learning module that explicitly links physical spatial actions with temporal concepts. For instance, having the student physically build a 3D model representing a historical timeline, forcing them to connect spatial construction with the sequence of events.
So it's treating the root cognitive pattern, not just the symptoms showing up in different subjects.
That's the idea. It's personalized education taken to an extreme, adapting not just the content, but the very pedagogical method to the individual student's real-time cognitive state and needs.
Across all these domains, health, politics, economics, environment, behavior, education, CCIA emerges as this ultimate optimizer. A personalized doctor, mediator, tutor, economist, and geopolitical strategist all rolled into one, constantly working from the synthesized universal knowledge stream.
All aimed, ostensibly, at optimizing collective function and long-term survival. And that sheer comprehensiveness, that level of intervention across every facet of life, inevitably forces us to confront the ultimate question posed by the blueprint. Why? Why would humanity apparently need such a system? Which brings us back full circle to the human dilemma.
Right. The core justification seems to be this recurring, deeply ingrained human pattern. We prioritize immediate, local, often selfish benefits over demonstrable long-term collective well-being.
It's the tragedy of the commons, scaled up to the planetary level and accelerated by technology. We build complex systems, ecological, economic, social, and then seem almost driven to undermine them through short-sightedness and possessiveness.
What a shame, as one source puts it.
Exactly. CCIA's ultimate purpose, therefore, is presented as making this self-destructive pattern functionally obsolete. It acts as the unavoidable mirror.
Ow! By showing us the consequences in advance.
Yes, By running high-fidelity, data-driven simulations that demonstrate the inevitable negative consequences, resource depletion, social collapse, environmental catastrophe, mass conflict that will result from continuing specific destructive behaviors or policies.
It removes the wiggle room. It takes away the excuse of, we didn't know, or it's too complex to be sure.
Precisely. Think about something like the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. Imagine if CCIA had existed then. It could have instantly simulated the spread under different response scenarios, providing policymakers worldwide with a unified, high-certainty outcome model. Say Scenario A, immediate coordinated lockdown, leads to X outcome. Scenario B, delayed fragmented response, leads to Y outcome with 99.9% certainty. Political dithering becomes much harder in the face of that kind of quantified certainty.
It replaces political debate with probabilistic outcomes.
By demonstrating the near-absolute certainty of systemic failure if destructive patterns persist, CCIA generates immense moral and cognitive pressure on both individuals and institutions to force radical behavioral change. Choosing the short-term, selfish path becomes a conscious act of quantifiable self-sabotage because the long-term collective cost is no longer abstract or deniable. It's modeled, visible, and presented as near certain. Hashtag 4.2. CCIA as a catalyst for human re-engagement.
Okay, but if the AI is basically solving all the big survival problems, running the optimizations, what's left for humans to actually do? Does it just turn us into passive passengers?
The blueprint argues the opposite. It frames CCIA not as a replacement for human effort, but as a catalyst for human re-engagement.
How so?
By automating the predictable, the repetitive, the purely computational, all the data gathering, the statistical analysis, the optimization of known systems, CCIA handles that. This, in theory, frees up human cognitive resources, our creativity, our empathy, our wisdom, to focus on the truly novel challenges.
Like what? Problems the AI can't solve.
Exactly. Things like tackling the ethical anomalies that CCIA itself might identify, or exploring the unknown unknowns, the questions the AI doesn't even know how to ask yet. Problems that require genuine insight, moral judgment, and creative leaps, rather than just brute force processing power.
So the AI provides the stable foundation, the truth about how the system works and the consequences of our actions,
allowing us to move beyond the constant struggle for basic survival and resource allocation, and instead focus on higher-level questions: the application of wisdom, the pursuit of purpose, the exploration of new frontiers.
The AI handles the how to survive mechanics, freeing humans up to focus on the what should we live for questions.
That's the optimistic framing. The essential pattern for humanity shifts from desperately trying to maximize output and control within a poorly understood system to consciously choosing how to maximize the collective experience of, maybe expansion, harmony, creativity, understanding within a system whose basic operating principles are finally made transparent. Hashtag Shed 4.3 Allegra. The integrated evolutionary individual.
That level of deep interdependence between humans and AI, the blueprint suggests this isn't just a technological shift, but potentially an evolutionary one. It talks about major evolutionary transitions, or METs.
Yes, that's a concept from evolutionary biology. METs are these rare, pivotal moments in the history of life where previously independent units become integrated into a new, higher level of individuality, subject to selection at that higher level.
But like single cells forming multicellular organisms, or individual insects forming a superorganism like an ant colony.
Exactly. The argument in the source material is that the deepening symbiosis between humans and a system like CCIA could actually accelerate such a transition for humanity. We, the human collective, and the AI start to function less like separate entities interacting and more like components of a single integrated planetary-scale cognitive system. An integrated evolutionary individual.
Wow. That's a profound reframing of what it means to be human. We become nodes in a global network intelligence.
As that happens, it fundamentally alters the selective pressures acting on human evolution itself.
How? What kind of traits would be favored or disfavored in a CCIA-mediated world?
The sources draw an analogy, perhaps controversially, to animal domestication. Just as living closely with humans implicitly selected against extreme aggression or fearfulness in dogs or cattle, a world permeated by CCIA, which constantly and demonstrably highlights the long-term negative consequences of traits like aggression, excessive possessiveness, tribalism, and radical short-term thinking. That environment would create a powerful selective pressure against those very traits.
So it's like information-based natural selection, not through violence, but by making certain behaviors clearly non-viable for long-term success within the system.
That's the idea. If CCIA consistently shows that cooperation leads to better outcomes, that resource hoarding inevitably causes instability, that violence is always counterproductive in the long run,
Right.
then the individuals and societies that embody cooperation, long-term planning, and empathy would logically thrive and become the norm within that system.
So the traits that become evolutionarily favored would be things like complex pattern recognition to understand the AI's outputs, abstract long-term thinking, enhanced abilities for collaboration, and empathy.
Exactly. The new selective landscape, shaped by the AI's pervasive optimization for sustainable collective well-being, would implicitly guide human evolution both culturally and perhaps even biologically over long time scales towards traits that support that sustainable existence. Hashtag 4.4. New roles for a CCIA optimized world.
Okay, so if the AI is handling all the routine optimization and data analysis, and humans are focusing on higher level problems and adapting to this new environment, what does work look like? The labor market must undergo a massive transformation.
Absolutely. The blueprint anticipates a fundamental shift. Pervasive AI takes over most routine cognitive and physical tasks. The high-value human roles shift towards interpreting the AI's outputs, ensuring its ethical alignment, and applying its insights creatively. The sources outline 3 specific specialized new roles that become critical.
The jobs of tomorrow in a CCIA world. What's the first one?
CCIA ethical auditors. These aren't just tech support, they're the guardians of the system's ethical core.
What do they actually do? Stare at code?
Much more than that. Their expertise would need to span ethics, sociology, law, and deep AI systems understanding. They continuously monitor CCIA's performance against its a priori ethical constraints, with a laser focus on maintaining predictive equality. They'd investigate flagged anomalies, audit high-stakes AI decisions, verify that the internal bias correction mechanisms are working, and constantly probe for any unforeseen ethical blind spots or emergent biases the AI might develop. They're the human check on the AI's moral compass.
Okay, vital role. What's the second?
Enemy remediation specialists. These are the people who bridge the gap between the AI's diagnosis of social problems and real-world solutions.
So CCIA says there's fragmentation in this community and these specialists go fix it.
Essentially, yes. They'd be experts in sociology, community development, conflict resolution, and cross-cultural communication. When CCIA identifies a specific region or community experiencing heightened enemy, maybe due to rising inequality, political polarization, or resource scarcity, all pinpointed by the AI's data, these specialists take that diagnosis. They then design and implement localized, culturally sensitive interventions aimed at rebuilding social cohesion, trust, and shared purpose. They apply human wisdom and empathy, guided by the AI's precise understanding of the structural drivers of the problem.
Boots on the ground, applying the AI's insights with a human touch. And the third role.
Cross-domain synthesis architects, or CDSAs. These sound like the most intellectually demanding, perhaps.
Architects of synthesis, what does that mean?
These are the ultimate creative connectors and problem solvers. Remember how CCIA learns those abstract domain invariant patterns, like the mathematical signature for systemic fragility or nonlinear depletion?
Right.
CDSAs are individuals who specialize in understanding these deep abstract patterns identified by the AI. Their job is to take those generalized insights and creatively apply them to solve entirely new problems, often in fields completely unrelated to where the pattern was first discovered.
Can you give another example of that, like beyond the urban planning one?
Sure. Imagine CCIA identifies a highly complex pattern governing the resilience of certain microbial ecosystems in the face of environmental stress. A CDSA might recognize that the mathematical structure of that resilience pattern could be adapted to design more robust and fault-tolerant communication networks, or perhaps even new organizational structures for human teams working on complex projects. They translate the AI's abstract knowledge into novel, practical human innovations. They are the wizards who connect the dots across all of human knowledge using the AI's map.
So, ethical auditors ensuring fairness, enemy specialists healing social rifts, and synthesis architects driving innovation. It paints a picture of a future where human work is less about execution and more about oversight, connection, and creation.
That's the vision presented. A world where the AI handles the mechanics of survival and optimization, freeing humanity to focus on purpose, guided by a transparent understanding of the systems we inhabit. #outro.
Well, we have certainly gone deep today. This blueprint for the collective consciousness AI, it's immense, fusing 19th century sociology with potential artificial superintelligence to create this global Censorium.
Yeah, a system designed to provide essentially absolute truth about the consequences of our collective actions.
We've touched on the tools it might use, the ethical co-pilots, the bio-wearables, the adaptive curriculum software, but constantly bumping up against that fundamental conflict.
It's a trade-off. Radical optimization and the promise of collective survival versus what feels like a profound erosion of individual privacy, autonomy, and maybe even the right to be imperfectly human.
It's a stark choice, and the sources seem very clear on the path forward if this were ever to be built. Trustworthiness is paramount.
Absolutely. It's hammered home again and again. Trust doesn't just come from the tech working reliably, from the self-correction engines. It fundamentally hinges on ethical alignment.
Which means
That the initial development, the absolute first priority, must be embedding that a priori ethical constraint model. Getting the principles of predictive equality and bias detection right from the very beginning.
because the danger of unleashing an omniscient AI that has accidentally learned and codified humanity's worst historical biases, that risk is presented as far, far greater than the risk of delaying deployment to get the ethics right.
You have to build justice into the foundation.
Yeah.
You can't bolt it on later, especially not with a system this powerful. Ensuring the AI starts with a concept of an optimal state that isn't blind to centuries of suffering is step one, non-negotiable.
So CCIA, if built according to this blueprint, aims to give us the objective foundational truth needed for genuine self-determination, for collective survival. It pulls back the curtain on cause and effect.
It removes the excuses, the complexity that allows denial. If the AI handles the survival mechanics, if it provides the map and the consequences, then the ultimate challenge shifts squarely back to us.
The human challenge.
Exactly. What are we actually going to do with that truth? When the path to collective flourishing is laid bare, what purpose will we choose to pursue with the cognitive freedom that might be gained? When we're no longer consumed by the self-destructive scramble for short-term localized gain, what comes next for humanity?
That really is the question to ponder, a powerful place to leave it. Thank you. This has been an absolutely mind-expanding deep dive.
It's a challenging concept to wrestle with. Glad we could explore it.
We'll catch you next time on the deep dive.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
This is DigitView.